Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hello guys, I'm Indri Lestari and I'm a student of class 4H in English Education Department at Islamic State University Raden Intan Lampung, and my student ID number are 1911040362. Okay guys, in this video I will do my mid-house in foundation of translation lesson. That is, I must make a video that explain about the previous material that have we discussed in the class. Okay, here I will start by explain from the first material. The first material is explain about introduction and definition of translation. Okay. A translation is the process of result of transferring a text from one language into a text in another language. And then there are 8 methods of translation. The first is word-for-word translation, literal translation, faithful translation, semantic translation, adaptation, and then free translation, idiomatic translation, and the last is communicative translation. And then there are 3 characteristics of good translation. The first is accurate, and then the second is natural, and then the last is communicative. And then the second material is explain about kind of translation. Some kind of translation are formed because of the differences and similarities of the search structure. Different kinds of text that are going to be translated and different purpose in translation. Okay guys, based on the purpose of translation, so the kinds or types of translation, they are 4. The first is pragmatic translation, and then aesthetic poetic translation, and then ethnographic translation, and last is linguistic translation. Okay, now I will explain about the third material, that is translation method. There are 8 methods of translation. The first is a word-for-word translation, and then literally translation, faithful translation, semantic translation, adaptation, free translation, idiomatic, and the last is communicative translation. And the fourth material is translation technique. Technique is a practical ways to analyze and classify how the process of finding equivalence is carried out. Translation technique is the way used to transfer message from the SL or source language into the TL or target language that's applied at the level of word, phrase, clause, or sentence. And then actually there are 2 types of translation technique. The first is direct technique, and the second is indirect technique. Direct technique consists of borrowing technique and then call cue technique. And then indirect technique consists of so many techniques, such as the first transposition technique, and then modulation technique, compensation technique, and then adaptation technique, description, discursive, creative, established equivalent, generalization, particularization, reduction, substitution, and the last is variation technique. And then the 5th material is explain about procedure of translation. Yeah, procedure of translation is the activity take to complete translation. The difference between method and procedure is the unit its application. method of translation with regards to the entire text, whereas the translation procedure applies to sentence and units smaller language or textual microunit such as clauses, phrases, words, and then the others. And the procedure is the same as the strategy used by the translator for solve problem in the translation based process, the translator's own goals. And then there are 5 procedures in translation, namely transposition, modulation, and then naturalization, and then contextual conditioning, and the last namely footnote conditioning. Okay, now now I will explain about the material, the assessment of translation quality. Yeah, what is the purpose of assessment of translation quality? Yeah, the purpose of the assessment in translation quality is to know what the translation result is clear or not. This means that the target reader can understand the translation very well. There are some types assessment of translation quality, such as accuracy test, and then readability test, naturalness test, comprehension test, and then consistency check, back translation, close technique, and then knowledge test, and the last is performance test. And then the last material that we have discussed in the class is problems of translation. Yeah, translation is a natural process. So any language that needs to be translated should be undertaken by experienced translators who know both the search and target language well. However, there are many translation problems. They are such as the first, the use of two-word verbs, and then the words with multiple meanings, and sarcasm, and then culture, idiom, and missing names in translation, and compound word is also the problem of translation. Okay, I think enough. That's all my explanation about the previous material of a foundation of translation that have we discussed in class. I'm so sorry for my mistake. And last word, I'm say Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.